Hello, and welcome to the podcast that tries to answer one simple question. What is this thing called film noir? I'm your host, Sergio Angelini, and welcome to Tipping My Fedora, where we discuss movies, books, TV, radio, and much more besides, all from the darker side of the street. Today's episode is the first of a two-part look at the 1940s films made by Alfred Hitchcock that fall within the noir pantheon. My companion is going to be Brad Friedman, who was born and raised in San Francisco, where he's inspired by the constant fog, the myriad of long dark alleys, and a host of questionable characters. He graduated from UC Berkeley, dabbled in the theatre as both an actor and a director, and eventually embarked on a 31-year-long career as an educator of drama, literature, and cinema. For years, Brad exposed his film students to endless examples of film noir, and nearly got away with it too. He has also directed 100 productions, both for school and the community, including such classic mysteries as And Then There Were None and The Mousetrap. As a sideline, Brad hosted a TV quiz program for teens called Quiz Kids for 15 years. A lifelong mystery fan, Brad has been writing about classic crime literature and film for 10 years on his blog Our Sweet Mystery, and I urge you to go visit that right away. Last year, incidentally, he was invited to speak at the annual Agatha Christie Festival in Torquay, all about one of my favourite books in her canon, Cards on the Table, which is great if you love bridge. But now, for the next hour or so, he's all ours. So let's talk about a couple of classic Alfred Hitchcock noirs. It was the second attempt we had made to try and record a podcast together, the first having been completely felled by technical difficulties. I really hope you enjoy this. It was great talking to him. Brad, welcome to the podcast. It's been a long time coming, and actually I failed the last time I tried to get you on the podcast, so let's hope this works.
I'm glad to finally be here, Sergio. I really am.
In the flesh, so to speak. Before we get started, let me just say, so here I am in northwest London. It's grey, it's cold, it's December. By the time this is listened to, things might be worse or they might be better. But we're recording this in 2024. You're probably going to be listening to this sometime in early 2025. What's it like in San Francisco, Brad?
Well, I'm a little south of San Francisco on the peninsula, and it's sunny and moderate, as it always is in California.
It's so unfair. But it's still technically Northern California, right?
So, Northern California, right.
I've met so many happy memories of that part of the world.
That's right. You went to Berkeley, too.
My then girlfriend went to Berkeley, so I was Berkeley adjacent. I got to hang around and audit a few classes and wait for her a lot, which meant I got to know the food stalls really well and stuff like that.
I used to sell giant cookies from one of those food stalls at Sather Gate.
Oh my goodness. She and I went out for a long time, so I did go to visit a lot. So, welcome. You know what's coming. Icebreaker question. What is your definition of film noir, Brad?
Well, I think you and I have talked a lot. We've talked enough for you to know that my definition of film noir is piecemeal and fragmented, which I think may be the best word to describe film noir. Fragmented. A fragmented reality for our poor benighted hero or anti-hero. I always thought of film noir more as a style, something that came out of German Expressionism, something that, as I have grown to learn over the years, was really evident in early 40s films and became something known as film noir later on, post-war, when people actually sat up and took notice and gave it a name. I've thought of film noir as the kind of film that has certain types of characters, certain types of settings, a certain type of lighting and camera style, and it is still the idea of a whole philosophy or definition of film noir is still formulating in my head. So I can't speak that knowledgeably to you. I can say this is a film noir because it has this and this and this. or because it makes me feel a certain way. I tend to think of film noir as a film that makes me sometimes end up feeling somewhat hopeless, somewhat ironic, makes me see the world in a skewed way, tends to be exciting, tends to be dark, tends to turn an innocent man's life upside down or make a guilty man pay like he's never paid before. I don't know. I'm throwing things out here. Is anything sticking to that wall,
I was going
Sergio?
to say, I mean, who wouldn't be attracted to that, right? I mean, come on.
Right.
So, with that in mind, what was your first film noir and when?
I was trying to think about this. My first film noir probably came back in high school and was wasted on me. We had an after school film club that I wasn't really a member of, but I used to walk in and sit down and watch the movies. Someone dragged me along with them. I remember watching Citizen Kane there and not knowing what the heck was going on. And now it's one of my favorite films. But I'm pretty sure that one of the movies we watched was Double Indemnity, which to this day is one of my favorite films. But as I say, it was probably wasted on me when I was 16 years old.
Mm.
It's a film that I have watched dozens of times. I've taught the film in film class, and I have always thought of it as sort of a movie that epitomizes classic noir.
I think that what's terrific about you picking that film as well and the issues around definition of noir. I'm holding in my hand, so listeners of course know exactly what I'm talking about, the third edition of Film Noir, an encyclopedic reference to the American style, edited by Alan Silver and Elizabeth Ward. There's since been a fourth edition. I've got that one too, but it's hardback and harder to lift, so I brought the third one. Also, they changed some of the contents. Inside there, they have a whole section devoted to Hitchcock and why he's such a problem when it comes to film noir. But you and I are going to talk about Alfred Hitchcock because he's basically our favourite filmmaker. And we just want to be able to explore some of those films that seem to fall within the noir approach, style, canon, and see how well he swims in that, despite being a filmmaker who seems to be able to somehow be always ahead of the curve. He's a trend setter, not a trend follower. So I suspect that's part of the issue with trying to say, well, he belongs to this kind of pre-existing series when actually he seems to just do his own thing. So we thought we'll do the classic film noir period, 40s and 50s. And how does that apply to Alfred Hitchcock, the great British filmmaker? How does it apply to his work? And how does he swim within these extremely shark-infested waters? I guess I thought we should start with his first American film, which, strictly speaking, I suppose falls within that Gothic noir category, which is Rebecca, the adaptation of the smash hit best-selling novel by Daphne du Maurier, and which David O. Selznick hired Hitchcock to make, and then proved to be this massive outing, this hugely expensive production, very plush, wonderful to look at, which Hitchcock, I think, was never entirely happy about because it was very much Selznick as the auteur producer having to do battle with Hitchcock, the auteur director, except Hitchcock was used to getting his own way by then in the UK. In Hollywood, he was brand new boy. He had never made a film there before, and they did things differently there. So what do you think about Rebecca as a movie and as a Gothic noir, if you think that's a fair appraisal? What do you think of it now?
Would you allow me to step back from Manderley for just a moment?
Yes.
Because all I have to do is get up from my chair, trip over my circle light, dive down, spill my tea, and grab the same book that you just held up.
I'll be with you.
I forgot to read the Hitchcock section, which is probably a good thing. Although I still do think perhaps there's something problematic in our discussion, but we'll see if we even get there. You know, I was thinking about Hitchcock as a young man and going to Germany, I think it was 1924.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Watching Murnau film The Last Laugh, and eventually making his first two pictures there. The influence of German film and German expressionism on him that he brought with him and applied to The Lodger, which he, in 1927, he called probably his first real film. I tend to agree because it's the first film of his that interests me, but you could probably look at that film and see elements of noir there, or the elements of noir that we're talking about. So when we go to 1940, when we skip the 30s and go to 1940, I'm thinking maybe in his way, Hitchcock was applying that pinpoint accurate Brad Friedman definition of film noir. It's this kind of thing with a kind of style and a kind of look and some stuff. And he put those things into Rebecca the best he could. But I agree with you, it was a battle. That gigantic tome about Selznick that I read years ago contains what felt like hundreds of pages about the hundreds of messages he would send daily to Hitchcock saying, it must have this, it can't have that. Their relationship was fraught that way through every film. We'll come upon it in another film in a little while. But this was a battle royal between two intensely creative and brilliant men who each wanted things to go their own way. So for me, when I watch that film, I tend to see more of the Gothic rather than the noir. For me, the noir tends to be centered mostly around the relationship between Mrs. De Winter and Mrs. Danvers. I think Judith Anderson sort of epitomizes that noir element of that film. The way she's shot, the way she plays the character. It's actually incredibly subtle. The perversity of her character, which I don't remember so much from the book, but it's been a long time since I've read that book. The relationship between Mrs. Danvers and Rebecca, which Hitchcock was never afraid to insinuate things without speaking outright. The central scene for me in that movie is the scene when Mrs. De Winter visits Rebecca's room for the first time and is sort of seduced by Mrs. Danvers with the clothing and the underwear and the fur nestling across her pink cheek. That to me is very noirish.
Well, arguably, this is a film with two femme fatales, because one of them is Rebecca herself, who we hear about but we never meet, and Danvers herself. Although, it's interesting, one of the changes that Hitchcock was thinking of making when he did that initial draft, which he collaborated on with Philip MacDonald, the great 20s and 30s mystery writer, then went on to become a terrific screenwriter of Charlie Chan and Mr. Motto films and all kinds of other things, was to have a flashback in which we would have seen Rebecca herself, which is an interesting idea because one of the things that Hitchcock doesn't do very often actually is have flashbacks. This is an unusual book. It's all about this person who you never meet, and it's about this person with whom you are meant to identify, but who you never even find out who their name is. So, of course, Selznick did vast amounts of polling to say, well, we're going to have to give her a name. Needless to say, I think the most popular choice, do you know about this? It would have been Daphne. Can you imagine how awful that would have been?
Terrible.
Of course, because there are these references in the book that she actually has this perhaps slightly unusual, slightly complicated name that's sort of hard to pronounce and hard to spell. So it's probably Charmaine, Hermione, who knows. If we accept that they are the femme fatales of the story, and of course we start in flashback, because the opening is, of course, one of the great opening lines of fiction and of the movie. Last night I dreamt I went to Mandalay again, which, endlessly quoted. People know it who don't even know where it comes from.
Last night I dreamt I went to Mandalay again. It seemed to me I stood by the iron gate leading to the drive, and for a while I could not enter, for the way was barred to me.
And so you could argue, well, we're sort of following what will become the template for a lot of noir films, the noir flashback and the narrator who may or may not be entirely reliable. Then we see everything through their eyes, and it's very subjective. One of the unusual aspects of the film is that there's Hitchcock, who is so associated with subjectivity. That's such a crucial aspect of the suspense films that he became so celebrated for, particularly in the 30s. And yet he's having to slightly pull back to the kind of Hollywood objective style that Selznick wants him to use. And yet at the same time, I rewatched it just the other day in anticipation of our podcast, and it does have what I would personally consider to be a number of great Hitchcockian touches. It conforms to that Jane Eyre cycle of stories that continues to this day. You know, the sort of mad woman in the attic sort of approach. Here she's sunk offshore, but basically she's still the mad woman in the attic. And here we get a sumptuous production. Lots of great actors. One of the things I wanted to ask you, as someone who, after all, has done more than his fair share of directing, what do you make of Joan Fontaine and her performance in the film? A lot of actors tested for it, right? A very young Anne Baxter, Loretta Young, Vivian Leigh. So she was someone who eventually got it. She had done a number of films where she was the supporting actor. And here this is a major role, after all. She is the audience identification figure. Maxim, as played by Laurence Olivier, is this remote, hard-to-read, gruff person in lots of ways. Rebecca, you never see, Danvers is deliberately inscrutable, after all. She's a mysterious person. She's supposed to be someone who we get and we totally understand and share with. What do you think of her performance?
Well, I think she's part of the challenge of this film to some degree. One of the continual tropes you see in film noir is the tension of a man trying to choose, does he want the good girl or does he want the dangerous woman? Does he want the voluptuous beauty or does he want the cute helpmeet? And we see time and again films about a man tempted away from that nice girl by somebody incredibly wrong, but oh so good, you know? And that's sort of here. But it's got problems for Hitchcock because, number one, the tempestuous woman isn't alive and there is no flashback. I think a flashback would have been a terrible mistake, but at least we would have lost some of the mystery of who Rebecca was and why she tempted him so, because she turns out to be, spoiler alert, a pretty horrible person. And the nice girl is played by Joan Fontaine, who had just done a lovely job in The Women as Peggy. She was absolutely adorable and cute and silly, but I never find a real depth to her. And that's not fair without looking at her entire body of work, but I don't feel the depth here. And yet that's what the movie's about. The movie's from her point of view, and it's about her achieving that depth. She enters into this marriage for all the wrong reasons, to escape that horrible woman in the Riviera. She's not prepared to deal with a man who is such a mess. But the man is not the main character here, despite him being played by Laurence Olivier. He's the man that she has to earn the love of and also teach him how to earn her love as well. And I think one of the problems we may find as we look at some of these films as noir is that for Hitchcock, the romance is often the supreme thing that he's getting to. How are these two people going to get together? Which we will see in film after film after film. And the noir aspects, the crime aspects, the suspense aspects are the MacGuffin. They're the way that these two people will find each other. And this is early enough, Hitchcock, where the two people do end up finding each other. Later on in the 50s, we'll see that it's not always so certain. But here, they do. And your question about Fontaine, it's a matter of personal preference. I would have loved to see Loretta Young play this role because I love Loretta Young, but she would have been wrong for this part. This is the part of a woman who is still a girl, who is still unformed, who is completely inadequate to take on the position of Mistress of Manderley. And we watch her grow. We watch her lose a lot and in the end gain a lot. We watch her be victimized over and over again, which can be very tiresome in a long movie. And I don't think I'm always interested in watching her be victimized. We're not going to talk about suspicion, but for me, that can be sometimes one of the most tiresome Hitchcocks because it's all about Lena bemoaning herself before, during, and after her marriage to Johnny. And here, she's a nervous little thing, isn't she? All the time.
Yeah.
Until the trial, until all of that, when she starts to grow. But then she's sort of pushed into the background a little bit more as Max becomes more of the center focus. So
Partly, I suppose, it's just the way they're handling the plot, of course, because it's a kind of
Right, of course.
all that aspect of the story that belong to his relationship with Rebecca now start to become a thing, which inevitably, in plot terms, squeezes her out. But you're right. One of the pleasures of the film is seeing her come out of her shell and, to use not a great term perhaps, but she slightly tames Maxim de Winter. Although I think it turns out that he isn't the bear that he seems to be, and I think that's it's bringing that out of him. It's always there, which is the Jane Eyre Rochester dynamic, after all. And what was it, 3 years later, she of course stars in Jane Eyre with Orson Welles playing Rochester, so no big surprise there either.
And we're also talking about this in 2024. She did not win the Oscar for this. She was nominated, I think, right?
Yes.
She did not win it. She won it for Suspicion.
That's right.
Sometimes you might suggest, well, why didn't she win it for the bigger picture? Was she overwhelmed by all the other stuff, or is Suspicion it's not as good a picture as Rebecca, but maybe those were the days when people loved that kind of person, that kind of character on screen, that timid, finding herself figure, earning her position to be the married woman. She exemplified that. She personified that in so many of her films. And I guess she did a really great job. She was honored for it.
It's fascinating to me when you look at something like Rebecca, which has got such amazing legs in terms of the success of the book and multiple adaptations, the most recent for Netflix, directed by Ben Wheatley. Not a bad version at all. I mean, there's a TV version, Dinah Rigg as Danvers, as I recall, which is actually, well, has more of the book in it as well, because this is a super faithful adaptation, but they've got to cram it into 2 hours and 10 minutes. The one big change they made, of course, is the ending, I guess.
Right.
In the book, spoiler alert, he's goaded by Rebecca, and so it turns out that he basically just shot her and sort of chucked her body out at sea. Here it turns out that he didn't do anything quite that nefarious. But you do get one of the greatest visually exciting moments of the film when it's the non-flashback, isn't it? He's doing the reconstruction of the crime, and this is where the camera sort of moves around the empty room while, in this case, Maxim describes what he did. So you get this fascinating idea where it's sort of, you're not actually seeing it, but you're getting the physicality of it, and it aids the mental picture that's being drawn, but at the same time it allows for a greater, shall we say, ambiguity. And I find that very interesting idea, this idea that you, like you say, with a flashback, and this is something we'll talk about when we talk about Hitchcock's 50s movies, perhaps, and we're not going to talk about it today, but the idea of flashback as being something in the movies that you always believe, because it's concrete and you see it in front of you, and so it's in the objective mode. But the idea that you could have a flashback that is in fact subjective is something that, of course, Hitchcock will dally with controversially in a later film, and we'll get to that one.
We also have to think that in addition to having to deal with Mr. Selznick, Hitchcock also had to deal with the Hays Code. I recently took a class at Stanford on Hitchcock's relationship to the code, and it was fascinating.
Yeah.
He worked very hard to manipulate the people at the production code office, often with some success, but he usually had to give things up. He was never going to get permission to make Laurence Olivier a murderer who got away with it. And that would happen often enough. It would happen again in Suspicion. And he had so many wonderful ideas for how that would work, and he didn't get to do any of them, which I think makes it a lesser movie. Not his fault. He was stuck. So that, I think, happens here. And I think he did a good job with it. I think that scene you described is beautiful. I would be fascinated to be standing outside a movie theater in 1940 and talk to a bunch of fans of the book as they're coming out, how they felt Hitchcock did in terms of adapting one of their favorite books. This was something Selznick liked to do. He liked to adapt the best book of the year.
With fidelity, right? I mean,
exactly.
On the opening credits, it has this fascinating, weird description where it says, in the picturization of Daphne du Maurier's novel. So it's like every page is going to be in the movie, which is sort of a bit nearer to maybe Gone with the Wind than Rebecca.
And it's the opposite of the way Hitchcock treated his source material to our benefit. The way he changed books, not all the time, but most of the time, the way he expanded upon them to create a Hitchcock film was a wonderful thing. Doesn't mean that you can't redo Strangers on a Train someday the way it was written, but his Rebecca is a beautiful film.
One of the unusual aspects of his career is that while we have now gotten used to the idea that we split the British period from the Hollywood period in his career, that is to say, everything up to 1939 and then everything from 1940 to 1976. One of the odd aspects of that is this period in the middle where he's in Hollywood but is making films like his previous films that are either set in England or Europe with often British actors, but they're all done in Hollywood. So Rebecca is the first and most obvious example of this. But it's the same with Suspicion, it's the same with Foreign Correspondent. And even when he makes Saboteur at Universal, it's very much an Americanization of the British chase films like The 39 Steps that he'd been making. So it still doesn't quite feel right. So this leads us to, I think, a consideration of Shadow of a Doubt, which is said, I think with some authority, to have been considered by him consistently as his favourite of his American films, and I think his favourite of his films overall. You know, we could debate whether we think it's his best one, objectively, but he certainly rated it very highly, and one of the aspects of the film that comes across so strongly is how steeped it is in Americana. It's the first of his films that shoots to a really large degree on location, which was both unusual in cinema in general, which tended to still be basically stuck in the studio for economic reasons, but also for Hitchcock, who it's perhaps exaggerated that he didn't like to go on location, because he did shoot on location and for most of his movies after all. But here it's used a lot, and so this is Santa Rosa in somewhere in Southern California. I actually have never been there. So where's Santa Rosa, Brad?
You're so funny. Santa Rosa is in Northern California.
Damn!
Sonoma County, north of San Francisco. You go across the Golden Gate Bridge through Marin County, up through Sonoma County and Santa Rosa. So Northern California. And while I've got the mic, the Hitchcock family loved Northern California. I think it's one of my favorite facts about Alfred Hitchcock. He loved San Francisco. He didn't do badly by Northern California, both in terms of his personal life and in terms of his films. And so this gave him the opportunity to hang out for a while in Northern California, which I think obviated some of his reticence about filming on location. He liked to be in a studio. He liked total control. You know, they painted the house for him and he got all upset because the house looked too new and they had to repaint.
It was the homeowners, wasn't it? They knew it was going to be in the movie, so they repainted it.
Right. They wanted it to be bright and clean, so everyone thought, oh, they live in a nice house. But he said no, he wanted control, so he got his control. This is one of my top 5 Hitchcocks. It's not my number one. I have a specific number one, which we do get to talk about later. But I love Shadow of a Doubt, not least because it's set here, but it's a brilliant film.
And yet, one of the things I was going to ask you about regarding this film, because, okay, let's quickly do the plot. Everybody knows the plot of Rebecca. But oddly enough, I think the plot of Shadow of a Doubt is sometimes you remember the atmosphere and you don't entirely remember the story. So we start in what is in fact New Jersey. And we've got Joseph Cotton in this rather down-at-heel rooming house. He's a bit depressed and he's lying in bed and clearly he's having deep existential thoughts. He doesn't care about money. He doesn't care about his surroundings, although he's always, wears a suit and tie and everything. He's quite formal. But his landlady comes to tell him the couple of guys have come to look for him. Right. Okay. And he goes downstairs and he sort of stares them out because there are, in fact, these 2 guys who are just standing there and he just walks past them. And for some reason, they, rather than deal with him, they sort of wait for him to get out of their reach and then start chasing him, at which point they lose him. I think, yeah, way to go, guys. So we know he's wanted for something. We don't know who these men are, but he's involved in something vaguely shady. So he sends a telegram to his sister, who is in Santa Rosa, and says, I'm coming for a visit, and tell my niece, who is named after him. So he's Charles, Uncle Charlie, and she's also Charlie, presumably Charlotte. I don't know if we actually find that out, do we? But anyway.
I don't think so.
No, so maybe she is just Charlie. And played by Teresa Wright. Then he heads off, but he's in fact sort of poorly, and he gets on the train, and he's in this, it's interesting, he's like in a compartment that's secluded off with curtains, and presumably, I mean, this is going from the East Coast to the West Coast, so I don't know how long he was in that compartment, but he is a sick bunny for a very long time, and presumably had to change trains a few times. So anyway, then we cut to the house you were mentioning, which the owners decided, because it was part of the location shoot, and they tarted up, and he sort of said, no, I want it to look like a regular house. And we cut to Charlie number 2, and we get Teresa Wright, and all the shots mirror precisely those that had introduced Uncle Charlie himself, in the sense that she's also lying on the bed, feeling like, I mean, of course, she's a teenager. So she's having a bit of teenage ennui instead of, middle-aged man existential ennui. And it's coming from a different place. But literally the shot, the angle is repeating the exact pattern. The cutting, the angle is all the same. But she's thinking about her uncle. She talks about, it's like telepathy. And it's almost like he's thinking of the Merry Widow waltz, which we see presented on the screen, and which we hear as a sort of cut-in, as a transitional device. And she's sort of got it in her head and starts humming it, but which ends up having a sinister meaning. And so then she goes to send a telegram to say, I'll invite him to come and stay with us. But when she gets to the office, she said, here's a telegram that I'm for your mother saying Uncle Charlie is coming. So it's very sweet. And so he gets off the train, and he's been unwell, and he's got a walking stick, and he's being helped off the train. There's this fantastic shot with the train coming into town. The steam and the smoke is all very black. So we get this kind of literally a black cloud that descends briefly upon the town. But as he sees his niece, he sort of straightens up and gets sort of almost fit again and rejuvenated again. I've always thought that it's almost like a weird little sort of emotional vampire story. It's almost like he feeds off her youth and vitality and wants it for himself. Not in a horrible way, because I think he loves it. But the way it's presented, he sort of shakes off, either because it's a persona, but I think he is feeling very sorry for himself and he's very down. In fact, we hear about that much later in the film, of course. He talks about how he kind of reached the end of his rope, really. It's all very warm and very sweet-natured. There's quite a slow build-up in the film, isn't there, in terms of when we're introduced to the family and he goes into the family, and it's all beautiful stuff, and to a certain extent, I think, reflects the involvement of Thornton Wilder in the writing process. Thornton Wilder not only gets a co-writing credit, I mean, he wasn't able to finish the screenplay because he was inducted into the army, but he then gets a special acknowledgement just before Hitchcock's credit. The producer credit and then Hitchcock credit, which is sort of fascinating. But of course, Thornton Wilder, writer of Our Town and many other exceptional works, so is the perfect person to talk about small town America. I don't know if you entirely agree with my perhaps off-kilter vampire analogy. You were looking at me slightly. Tell me what you think, Brad.
Well, I only was looking at you that way because I believe you're wrong. But
tell me more. Tell me more.
I just think he's really hot right now. They know who he is. This is not a figure that they're not too sure of. They are coming after this particular man. They know what he looks like. They know his identity. And so he has to hide out. So he hides out as an invalid in a curtained train so that nobody will see him, just in case someone. That's the kind.
Do you think that's what it is? Because
I do.
Okay, because we don't know why they want him, of course, at this point, right? We don't know.
We don't know why. We only know that he's wanted. And that gives us a chance to focus on this twinness, because Teresa Wright, who is breathtaking in this movie, is so charming and wonderful, and her family is so charming. This is a rare time when Hitchcock is really warm. The people are warm. The children, that wonderful little girl that he found in Santa Rosa and cast as the little sister, the little monster, she's hilarious. Patricia Collins as the mother, Henry Travers, who will become, Clarence the Angel in It's a Wonderful Life. Hume Cronin as this, who could also be a psychopath. His bizarre love of, what's her name? Agatha Christie. My
Yes.
God, and right. It's just like he and the father talking about murder all the time. It's so warm and so wonderful. And this whole early section where we see these images, these twin images of these two people on the opposite sides of the country in the same positions on the bed while coming towards each other. It's all okay because we're not quite sure yet what Uncle Charlie has done. And he could very well be a misunderstood con man. There are so many types of characters he might be. And he's Joseph Cotton, after all. Joseph Cotton, who is normally playing pretty decent gentlemen. Not all the time, but most of the time. I just think it's beautifully rendered before we find out who the Merry Widow killer is and all of that. And then we are set in this beautiful small town setting to have it all ripped apart through Charlie's experiences. The shadow of a doubt that comes over her as his closeness to her makes it impossible for Charlie, Uncle Charlie, to hold back on how he feels about the world, how he feels about the women he kills, and how dark his vision of life is. He can't help being openly psychopathic with her because he trusts her so much. He feels like he's speaking in a sense to himself.
Yeah.
And he doesn't understand for a while what that does to her and how that changes her. And then I think you get into that vampiric aspect because as he does that, some of himself starts seeping into her. She becomes dark. She becomes troubled. She starts to see the world as a darker, more difficult, more unpleasant place. And what does it do to her in the end? It drives her to murder. It's justifiable, but it drives her to commit a murder in a way.
In a
You know,
way,
I mean,
self-defense.
in a way. But I mean,
you know.
she helps Charlie's death along.
Yes, although that is, I mean, in terms of presentation, we'll skip to the end and we'll come back, but I've always found that to be the least successful aspect of the film, purely in terms of how it's represented. You're thinking, I don't see how she did it. You know, she's certainly got God on her side, because I cannot see how this fairly diminutive teenager is able to get rid of this powerful adult figure who is, towers over her. After all, he's a lot taller than she is. Teresa Wright, she was not then and never was a large thespian, and Cotton was reasonably tall. In fact, it's interesting in the film, and I don't know if it's by design, but he always seems to be just about taller than everybody else, which is very interesting. It's odd how they couldn't come up with a better way to finesse that. I think in the end, I've always found that I would have almost preferred if it had been somehow ambiguous, if maybe he had allowed himself to be thrown off, but they couldn't bring themselves to do it. And I suspect you're right for the Hays Code. It wouldn't have been possible, right?
It wouldn't have been possible. We had to see this man who has committed so much evil pay for that.
And just allow himself to be punished wouldn't be good enough. And yet, as you say, because of the connection between the two of them, the nexus, she's the only one seemingly who could actually do it. Now, dialing back a little bit, one of the ways that we approach the story is as a Bildungsroman. So it's her moving towards adulthood, which involves facing up to some of the darker realities. After all, in that opening scene in the bedroom, she's sort of questioning, what's the point of it all? The fact is, she hasn't properly discovered boys yet. She hasn't really discovered all kinds of things in life. They lie just round the corner for you, sweetheart. Bad luck, but we've all got to do it. So she's about to get in that position. But she then has a very, very tough maturation in this film, because not only does she see herself crushed as she comes to believe, sadly, these things about her uncle, and there's a sort of ambiguity about some of it up to a certain point, and then there isn't. But on the other hand, it's because these government agents, okay, so it's the FBI, but they don't say it, who are sort of hounding him, and it turns out another man, so again, the doubling. There are two men who they think might be the Merry Widow killer, and one's out east and this one's out west. They get her to basically try and snitch on her uncle. They lie, they weasel their way into the household, take a photo of him so that they could show it to potential witnesses, which, okay, isn't crazy, but the way they do it is horrible and is depicted in a subtle way as a violation of their lovely private space. You know, they could easily have just arrested the guy, and they just don't do it. They're doing it by nefarious, underhanded means. They are not nice. And yet, actually, there's the older guy, played by Wallace Ford, fantastic character actor, and the emerging MacDonald Carey,
who seems about twice as old as Teresa Wright in this, but never mind.
And he becomes somewhat, not entirely convincingly, but you understand why they're doing it, the love interest. And like you say, he's not quite as blunt and not quite as nasty as maybe his colleague. But basically, they tell her what they think about Uncle Charlie so that she will help them arrest him. Somehow they're incapable of doing it on their own. Somehow they can't take him in for questioning. Obviously, it's all absurd, but it works on a psychological way rather than on a kind of reality level. And yeah, I like the fact that they don't come across that well. I mean, do you think that's a fair interpretation? That we're not meant to like them that much?
Well, again, some of this is apocryphal, but we always hear Hitchcock stories about his feelings about the police, even when they're on a mission. So I could understand that the relationship she develops with the cops is the opposite of what she always had with Uncle Charlie. It's not telepathic. It's not positive. It's not one of mutual love and affection and openness. It's subterfuge. It's secrets. It's something darker. I think that a lot of Hitchcock's raison d'etre in his films is to teach his heroes and heroines how to move towards maturity and love and marriage. And at the start of this film, Charlie is stuck in that adolescent place where she doesn't know why she's so dissatisfied. She's not satisfied because her childhood no longer can satisfy her. It shouldn't satisfy her, according to Hitchcock. She should no longer be a child. She's ready to move to the next level, and nothing that her family has done is helping her with that. They're stuck in this small town thing, which makes that all seem very negative, and it's not presented that way. But I think that's what's happening to Charlie. She's got to move forward. And the only man in her life, the only man she loves at this point is her uncle. She doesn't have any choices. There's a very interesting scene where she and Charlie are at the night spot and they're having it out finally. And that young woman who went to school with young Charlie shows up as the waitress. I don't know who the actress is. She plays it flat. She plays it so dark and low and despairing and hopeless, probably because she's had one too many boyfriends. She didn't figure it out correctly, but she moved too quickly out of childhood and let the world trample her. She's not the kind of person that Uncle Charlie will choose as a victim. She's the kind that Uncle Charlie would probably see as a fellow traveler. She's already got at her tender age this dark vision of the world, and it's all done through, "How are you, Charlie? Good to see you. I don't remember our classes at school." It's just a crazy scene.
The role of Louise Finch, the waitress at the restaurant, was played by Janet Shaw, and here's just a little snippet of her making her contribution to the film.
Why'd you bring me in here?
What does it matter where we are?
Hello, Charlie. Hello.
Oh, hello, Louise. Uncle Charlie, this is Louise Finch.
Hello.
Glad to meet you.
This is my Uncle Louise.
I was in Charlie's class in school. I sure was surprised to see you come in. I never thought I'd see you here. I've been here 2 weeks. Lost my job over at Kern's. I've been in half the restaurants in town. What'll you have, Charlie?
Nothing, thanks.
This is not where Hitchcock wants young Charlie to go. And yet he takes her on a very dark road with these policemen to find that knowledge that will let her love as an adult, be an adult. It shouldn't be with MacDonald Carey. It should be with someone more appropriate.
That's right.
But there you have it. There you have it. That's for me one of the only flaws in the movie. He's wrong for her.
I mean, the idea of it is interesting, but at the same time, there's just that conventional aspect of movie making at the time that Hitchcock couldn't yet get round, and I think therefore you have to be grateful for all the unusual aspects of the story in this film, because it, like you say, it goes to very dark places. I was very intrigued by what you were saying before, by this idea that in those two adjacent sequences, where they go to the bar, which is the second sequence, and the previous scene, which is, of course, the one at the dinner table, where he sort of is almost incapable of holding back because he's talking in a way to her. And what it also makes me think is that there's something very intriguing about the fact that Hitchcock seems to have loved this film because it feels very organic, and it's beautifully put together, and the story just basically works so well, and the characterization is so strong, and the editing is extremely smooth, and everything just seems to be inevitable about it, and yet is surprising and interesting. The only obvious big set piece that I can think of, the sort of thing that visually you associate with Hitchcock, with any of his films, is in fact that dinner table sequence, and it's very memorable. It's the one that gets invariably picked out. We'll include a clip of it right now.
The cities are full of women, middle-aged widows, husbands dead, husbands who've spent their lives making fortunes, working and working. Then they die and leave their money to their wives, their silly wives. And what do the wives do, these useless women? You see them in the hotels, the best hotels every day by the thousands. Drinking the money, eating the money, losing the money at bridge, playing all day and all night, smelling of money. Proud of their jewelry, but of nothing else. Horrible. Faded, fat, greedy women.
They're alive. They're human beings.
Are they?
One of the interesting things is that it's done as a single shot. It's him in profile, which is always sinister. There's no way to do just a sustained profile shot of someone, even if you're John Barrymore, and to not have that seem a little bit sinister in a movie. And the camera is slowly but surely tracking in. And then when Charlie goes in and says, but they're still people, they're still human beings, he then pivots, and of course he's looking at her and at the camera, and says, are they? It's a brilliant moment. Then she rushes off and he chases her. So the camera actually dollies behind him as he goes out through the front of almost. You also see him exit the house saying, I'll go get her. And then you dissolve and we're back in Santa Rosa. And the camera is still sort of in the same position, dollying behind him, tracking forwards, but now we're in the city street. And she's sort of further ahead of him. And I find that remarkably sort of smooth and again has that wonderful forward momentum, which visually just very, very exciting. So it does have all kinds of sort of perfect imagery, but it doesn't as easily, apart from that bit, you can't really pull the bits out of this film. I find it so interesting that that's the one he picked as his favorite. It doesn't have the forward reverse tracking shot from Vertigo. It doesn't have the shower sequence from Psycho. You know, these obvious big grandstanding wonderful moments. Instead, it's all very, very tightly figured out. It does work splendidly, as you say. Thematically, it's so well put together.
Well, that scene, that's one of those dozen or so tour de force visual scenes that people pull out when they want to study Hitchcock. I've shown that to students as well. I've shown the film to students. What's great about that scene is we focus on the technical virtuosity of it, the profile, and then the turn to the camera, telling the audience, are they? And we talk about it that way. But the fact is there are a bunch of people at that table. It's a pretty crowded table. And only one person at that table feels what Charlie is talking about. That's fascinating to me. His beloved sister, his brother-in-law, the others at the table do not understand the darkness and the wickedness underlying all this, the despair, the psychopathy underlying everything he says. But young Charlie gets it. And I think we see, not often, but sometimes, the precociousness of children in Hitchcock. I don't know how old his beloved Patricia was at this time. I think she was a little younger than Charlie, maybe.
Yes.
But she's still, you know, a big part of his life. And I think she was probably a very smart little girl. With Charlie, she has a sensitivity, partly from their connection as people, but also she's at that time of life when she's just reading people well. Maybe she hasn't gone out with lots of young boys because she can read their silliness or their weakness. She understands character. She alone of that family understands Uncle Charlie's character, which is a nightmare for her, but is ultimately her saving grace. It's what gets her through what for all of us, whether we had an Uncle Charlie or not, and I'd like to think that none of us did, it's a very difficult time. We all think we're going nuts. We all think the world is a terrible place. We don't understand why. It's like we're trying to burst out of our bodies. And Charlie's adolescence, her transformation to womanhood, takes the form of a crime story, which is, I think, a fascinating thing. And again, makes Uncle Charlie the MacGuffin, but I'm just going to keep harping on that silly little point.
The sadness at the core of the film is the sister so adores her brother, and in fact he always seems very genuine with her. But there is that sequence when Charlie says to her uncle, "If you don't leave, I'll kill you," and fade to black, and then we get the next scene, at which point he tries to bump her off. So it's kind of a war between the two, and not to do spoilers particularly, but there are films where, it would have been the big twist at the end would have been that the niece is in fact just as big a psychopath as he is. There are films that have done that. I don't think this film would benefit from that, but this, as you say, it's this sense that she's understanding that darkness, and actually the toughness that is part of her is also a sadness. She can actually deal with it in a way that her mother and her father never could. She's a bit different from them. She's a bit more like her uncle, hopefully in a pragmatic, nice way, meaning that she can cope with the world of the Second World War and post-war, and she will cope better in life, whereas her mum is utterly crushed. I like the idea of the big lie at the end, because he gets a big funeral, doesn't he? He's a friend of the city, and it's done in a really nice way. And it's quite quick because it's the movie's over. And then, we get that not interesting scene between her and MacDonald Carey. Although, again, it's done reasonably well.
We have to acknowledge that Hitchcock was at his worst in the final scene of almost every movie he made. That final tiny little scene. He hated resolutions. He loved climaxes. He was not good with most resolutions. Some of them are interesting, but for the most part, get done. And this is a silly little scene to sort of resolve things. But there is a moment when Emma says her heart is breaking, I think, at the thought of him leaving. They were a refuge to each other. As I recall, their childhood was not an easy one, and they were a refuge to each other, and he still sees that as a refuge. There are several possible endings here, most of them unsatisfactory. Charlie could overtly kill Uncle Charlie and save her family, which, as you say, has been done in more modern films, sometimes heroically, sometimes to accentuate the darkness within. It couldn't have happened then. We wouldn't have wanted to see Teresa Wright kill him overtly and turn into a little niece Charlie. Then there could have been that rapprochement. They could have actually sat down each other and said, look, if we each try to work for our own benefit alone, one of us is going to die. Nobody's going to be happy. But if we can stop and pause and you let me go, never tell about me, I'll go killing useless women. You have a lovely life. I'll send you money. And she says, okay, bye-bye, and never come back. And I'll explain to everyone why we never see Uncle Charlie again. And they could go off and live their own separate lives. That would have been a terrible ending, but it could have been a solution. This was the only one they could do. It's the best. It's the Hitchcockian solution. Each of them tries to end the other, and the right one wins in the end. It would be terrible if little Charlie died or went to jail or became a serial killer. She's a heroine, and she also protects her family, most of all, from the reputation of being the family of a serial killer. In the end, MacDonald Carey proves his worth by letting them live that lie. That's why that little scene is there, but it's still a stupid scene.
Yeah. On which note, thank you so much for coming to discuss 1940s noir Hitchcock with me. This has been really fantastic.
I've had so much fun.
We must do it again really soon and talk about 1950s noir Hitchcock. So I'm gonna book you for that, mate. We're gonna do it.
Interestingly, 1950s, like 1940s, has some of my favorite films and a couple of clinkers for me. And so I'll find myself in a similar position. So I look forward to coming back and talking about the 50s with you.
You take care, Brad. I'm going to talk to you soon, all right? Take care.
Bye-bye.
You have been listening to Tipping My Fedora, the show about all things noir. It is produced for Castiglione Publishing by me, Sergio Angelini, and our theme tune is by Petar Milinkovic, whose work is available through Tailkeeper Music. All audio clips are the copyright of their respective owners, and used under fair dealing and fair use exceptions solely for the purposes of criticism and review. Please subscribe to Tipping My Fedora wherever you get your podcast fix, and it would be great if you could leave ratings and reviews about the show at Apple Podcasts. Be seeing you.